Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode, number 57, I'm going to share with you one of my all-time favorite quilt patterns. It's behind me, Sweet and Simple with a Lime Twist. It also has another name, and I'll show you various sizes. Before we get to that, we have a winner of our very first giveaway, Carrie Homan. Carrie, please email me at quiltersheaveninc@gmail.com so I can take down your information and get your prize out to you. Now, let's get to my opinion. One of my employees came in, wanted to make a scrap quilt, and she brought with her a pattern she had downloaded free from the internet, and it's called Sofa Siesta Quilt. And she had me look at the pattern, and this falls under the category of read the pattern and look at it and make sure you understand it before you start the pattern. The first thing that it told you to do was to take 13 1¼ inch strips. So that means they finish to 3/4. And then it tells you to cut those 13 strips into 10 inches high and 9 inches across. Well, you've all done math with me before. Let's figure it out. 13 times 3/4, because the 1¼ finishes to 3/4, equals 9 3/4 plus your 1/2 inch seam allowance. So your strip piece is going to be 10¼ inches tall, not 10. The pattern tells you to trim off the 1/4 inch. Well, you've only got 3/4 of an inch. So if you take 1/3 of that off, it's going to be noticeable. Now, had this been a 6-inch piece and it tells you to cut off 1/4 inch, probably not going to notice it. But when it's those small pieces, it's noticeable. It would look to me like a mistake, because all the other strips are one size and one is 1/4 less. Yes, you could cut 1/8 off of one end and 1/8 off of the other end. That's double the trimming. That's just not logical to me. So, what are your options to make this easier to do? For me, when we do our scraps, we end up cutting 1½ inch strips. So if I was going to do this pattern, I would use 10 1½ inch strips. Well, now my block is now going to finish to 10, not 9½. So what does that mean? That means I need to change the alternate block. Failed to mention there was an alternate block. You may have noticed it when I held up the strips earlier. Here's the strip block. Here's the alternate block, so that the quilt comes out alternating. And they're rectangles, they're not squares. You've cut your strip piece 10 by 9, so it's an inch different than a square. So if I change my 10 inches to 10½ inches to finish to 10, I don't want to then cut this at 9, because there's only then going to be a 1/2 inch difference. It's not even going to look like a rectangle. It's going to really visually look like a square, even though it's not. It's a 1/2 inch off. So to keep it rectangular, you have to change your alternate block. So I have to make up a 1/2 inch somewhere. Easiest place to make up a 1/2 inch is in your center square. In the pattern, it tells you to cut this at 5, which would mean it finishes to 4½. But if I cut it at 5½ and finish to 5, there I've made up my 1/2 inch. So then, now these are not to scale. I can't draw to scale very well. These side pieces, besides the center square, you would cut 3 by 5½, so that finishes to 2½ by 5. So you've got 2½ and 2½ is 5, plus 5 is 10. With a 1/2 inch seam allowance, 10½, so you'll finish This will finish 10 high, just like this finishes 10 high. You have to do the side pieces. You'd cut them 2.5 by 10.5, and that would finish to 2 by 10. So it's 2 and 2 is 4, plus 5 is 9. So 9.5 when you add back in your 1/2 inch seam allowance. So now you've got a block that finishes to 9 and it finishes to 9 by 10. So slightly larger than the pattern, but it fits my 10 1.5 inch strips. You don't have to do that. You may have 1.25 inch strips in your bin. I don't, because I cut to 1.5, and if it's smaller than that, it goes in the dog bed stuffing. But I know a lot of my viewers do have 1.25 inch strips. So you could mix it up. If you use 6 1.25 inch strips and 5 1.5 inch strips, that'll get you to your 10. 6 times 3/4 is 4.5. 5 times the 1 will get you 5. That gets you to 9.5, plus your 1/2 inch seam allowance. That gets you to 10. So that's just what it was before. And different from the just trimming off 1/4 of one end of one of the strips, it's all mixed up. So it looks like it's planned, which it would be in this case. And it wouldn't look odd to me. It wouldn't look visually wrong. It would look like that's exactly what you were trying to do. And then you can follow the pattern the rest of the way the same. What's another option? I know a lot of you keep 1-inch strips. You can just take all those strings you have. I don't have them because they either end up in the dog bed or we tied bundles of fabric up with them. But all you people who do have strings, this could be a great scrap quilt for you. Just sew pieces together that are at least 9 inches long, sew them all together and trim your square to 9 by 10, and you can follow the rest of the pattern the exact same way. So again, you can do whatever you want. You can follow the pattern the way it is, or you could choose one of these other 3 options. If any one of these work better for you, do it. If you like the original pattern, you can always do that too. Just remember, there's options out there and perhaps a better way for you to do it. Now, let's get to today's episode. Behind me is one of my all-time favorite quilt patterns, Sweet and Simple with a Lime Twist. In fact, one version of that quilt was our very, very first store sample in the shop 15 years ago. When I went to reorder the booklet recently, the pattern was no longer available. I did find another version of the same pattern in Fabric Cafe's Easy Peasy, and it has the same quilt. It's right here in the corner. And it's the same thing, a square in the center with the frames around it. And we have a version of that right here. I do love this quilt for several reasons. One is it only takes 3 fabrics for the main body of the quilt. You can add more if you like for borders, or you can leave it at 3. But it makes it a whole lot simpler than that Boston Commons that I did many years ago where I had to pick 25 fabrics. This is 3. A center square, which is great for big print patterns that you don't want to cut up, and 2 coordinating fabrics to go with it. This is a 12-inch block. Easy Peasy is actually the book. It's in Easy Peasy. It does have a different name. What does she call it? Town Square. It's called Town Square in Easy Peasy. And it's the same thing, a center square with 2 colors of frames around it. This is a 14.5-inch block. I said this was a 12-inch block. When I was asked to make a quilt for a 2-year-old, I thought these block sizes were too big. So I made this 9-inch block with these trucks and I hope this little boy really likes it. I did use a fourth fabric, just this little red border. I didn't want to get wider than the full width of fabric for the backing. And I have 4 blocks across, so that's 36 inches. So I didn't want to add much more than that so I could get it on the long arm. But let's get to the numbers. If you want to do the Easy Peasy, the Town Square and Easy Peasy, you need to get her book. Sweet and Simple, you might be able to find it on Amazon or eBay. I'm not sure, but I can't give you those numbers here, but I'm sure you'll be able to figure it out from what I show you. No matter which block size you pick, the construction is exactly the same. You have a center square, and in my 9-inch version, I cut 6.5 to finish to 6. You make 2 strip sets, one a shorter one that goes on the sides, and one a bigger one that goes on the top and bottom, or they can be vice versa. It doesn't matter. You could put the short ones here and the long ones here, but just stay consistent, especially if you have directional fabric. If you're going to make this the first time, I would not do directional fabric. I would let it be viewed from any direction, because you have to be much more careful if you have a direction. So in this version, my small strip set is cut at 3.5 to finish to 3, which would make sense to you all because I set a 6-inch center square. So 3.5 finishes to 3, and 3 is 6, plus your 1/2 inch seam allowance will equal your 6. These now are 5 inches finished to 4.5. I've added 3 inches to each side of this, so now it becomes 9 inches finished, 9.5 unfinished. So your 4.5 plus 4.5 equals 9, plus your 1/2 inch seam allowance equals 9.5. And you cut these for this version in 2 inches to finish to 1.5. You just cut across just like you would for anything else. You sew just like any other block you would construct. Sew these together, press, sew these together, press, and I'm going to talk about pressing directions in a little bit. But you want to make sure that you get your colors together. If you have color A here, you want color A here. You don't want to mix it up and go like this, and it's easy to do. The other thing is when you make your strip sets, press to one color and always press to that color. In my case, I pressed to the black, but it doesn't matter. If you wanted to press to the blue, you could. Just always press to that same direction for every strip set you make. Now, let's go back to more numbers, because I decided that you could also make an 8-inch block if you wanted to. And if I'm trying to stay within less than 1 width of fabric and want to make a bigger border, and I do 4 blocks across, this would give me 4 extra inches. So I might choose to make an 8-inch rather than a 9-inch next time. So what would I do for an 8-inch block? Well, I'm going to start cutting a 5.5-inch square, which would finish to 5. And my first strip set will be 3 inches each, which would finish to 2.5. I will subcut those again still at 2 to finish to 1.5. I'm not going to make it smaller for 1 inch difference. You know, you'd be cutting crazy things like 1 3/4 or something like that. I'm not going to do that. So my second set will be cut 4.5 inch to finish to 4. And you know that's going to be right because I'm making an 8-inch block. Take off the seam allowance. 4 and 4 is 8. Plus your 1/2 inch seam allowance is 8.5. Your 8-inch block would be 8.5 inches square. So my numbers all balance. But now I found this cutest baby fabric ever. Made with Love by Moda. It's so adorable that I decided I wanted to make a real baby quilt instead of this toddler size quilt. Let's do the numbers for that. If we want to cut a center square 4 inches, so it will cut it 4.5 to finish to 4. So we've got 4 inches. So what's my first strip set going to be? Well, you got to get up to 4. So it's going to be 2 inches. 2 plus 2 is 4. So you're going to have to cut these. The first pair in this would be cut 2.5 to finish to 2. And then, I should say cut 4.5 to finish to 4. Now in this case, now this is much smaller than these guys. So for the subcut width, to add to the 4-inch finished square, I'm going to cut those at 1.5 to finish to 1. So that means I added 2 inches to my center square, which means now I'm going to get up to 6 inches finished. So my second set would have to be what? Do I hear everybody saying 3.5? Each one's 3.5. They'll finish to 3. 3 and 3 is 6. Plus half-inch seam allowance is 6.5. So it doesn't matter what size you do, you can make the numbers work. I want to show pressing directions, so I'm going to change out the board so I can show you. Remember when we talked about figuring out pressing directions, I said make 4 blocks, and then you can see where there's seams that meet so that you can press them in opposite directions. Now this will not apply to you if you are a press your seams open person, but I only press mine open if I have lots of things meeting. When it's just 2 seams, I nest. That's the way I've always done it, and it works really great for me, so that's what I continue to do. So here's 4 blocks. If you take your center squares over to your sewing machine and you sew them all the exact same way, this is what you will get. So in this example, I have the longer ones top and bottom and the shorter ones side to side. So when you put these together in rows, in addition to having the 2 colors meet here, and there's no problem there because you press to the black in this case, and even if you press to the blue, as long as you always press the same, they will nest. But now you have another seam that meets, and it's right here. And so if you do it this way, which is the way most of the directions that I see tell you to do it, you will need to press half of these out and half in so that when these 2 blocks meet, they will nest. Now you don't have that problem when you're sewing your rows together because this is all you have that meets. Now it would be the exact opposite if you put your shorter ones top and bottom and your longer ones side to side. You'd have nothing to worry about side to side. You'd only have it to worry about when you're sewing your rows together. But look what happens if you alternate. And I'm going to show you on the board how that works. Here's where I did half with the short ones top and bottom, and half with the short ones side to side. And what did that do for me? That made it so there's no seam meeting here. No seam meeting here. There's only your color intersection here, color intersection here, same all the way around. You have nothing to worry about with these outer seams because they will never meet anything. They will only meet shorts to long and longs to short. So you have two different ways of doing it. The visual is exactly the same. But if you want to have less seams to meet, this would be your option. If you want to sew everything in the exact same order, the one on the table is your way to go. You just have to remember to press your last longer pieces that you put on, half pressed in towards the square and half pressed out. So you're accomplishing the same thing, you're just going about it in a different way. And if I've learned anything from owning a quilt shop and doing these YouTube videos, everybody has a different way of doing things. So I did want to just lastly show you this absolutely adorable block. I told you that this was delivered with love. I think I'm saying it right. From Moda. Pretty new in the shop. And we picked this pretty little salmon-y colored dimples. And this is a Janine Burke older turquoisey fabric that we thought went really well with it. It's a 6-inch block. So I'm going to make another store sample of the same pattern as we've done. So doesn't matter what block size, make one. They're easy. 3 fabrics, 6-inch block, 8-inch block, 9-inch block, 12-inch block, 14.5-inch block. Make one, enjoy it. Until next time, happy sewing.